Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 37 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. So this chapter is called The Return of Atlas. So you might remember, at this part of the story, Hercules has been trying to find the Garden of the Hesperides to get the apples. He doesn't know where to go. He ran into Atlas. He told him what he was doing, and Atlas says, "I'll go get them for you," right? So he had just left, and Hercules has been waiting. When is Atlas going to come back, basically? So that's where we pick up the narrative, and you're going to continue the story and kind of see how this all plays out as we finish this 11th labor. Okay? Before we dive too far in, like I always tell you in these videos, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you know the vocab. So if you can find a vocab list or make one if you want to do a pre-read, something where you can learn what the words are in advance. It's almost impossible to read this if you just don't know what the words are, no matter how good you are at Latin. If you don't know the vocab, it's kind of a non-starter. So always start there, just so you at least have a sense of what the words mean, and then you can figure out the rest. The other thing I'd suggest that you do is read the story aloud, right? I tell you in all these videos, find someone you can read it to, have them read it back. That way you practice your speaking, your listening, your pronunciation, all those good things that'll help you just become a better reader of Latin. The last thing I'd suggest is the read and reread method. So read through the story once, write down any problem areas you have, whether it's vocab or grammar, anything you don't understand. Then come back when you've read through the entire thing, right? Don't stop and look it up, just write it down. Come back after that first read, try to figure it out. Okay, so the vocab is the easiest thing to find. You can look those up. For the grammar, it might be trickier, but you can use a commentary, just anything you have. There's a lot of good ones out there to help you understand what's going on. Then read the story a second time, third, fourth, as many times as it needs. You just keep repeating that process, and you're trying to hit a point where eventually you can read through this story without needing any help at all. No vocab help, no grammar help, and it might not be perfect, but you can at least understand it pretty well and get the vast majority of what's going on. That's always a good sign that you're on the right track. Okay, so if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go do it and come back. But if you want to keep going with the video, you probably should have done that already and use the rest of my videos just to check to make sure that you're on the right track. Your translation doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine, right? Mine are never perfect, but it should give you a little guideline so you can feel comfortable that you're on the right track to keep moving in this story. Okay, so we start like this. You have Atlas interia abierat et ad hortum hesperidum qui pauca milia passuum aberat sequam celerime contulerat. Okay, so you're starting with Atlas. Okay, remember he's gone. So meanwhile, Atlas was departing. Right, he was going away. And he you have to go down to contulerat. Right, so he carried himself. The se contulerat is probably best translated as carried himself. Right, it's a way of basically saying he had gone. Right, is really what it means. So literally, he carried himself, which sounds odd. But what he's saying is is that he had gone. Okay, so he had gone. Quam celerime. So remember, when you have quam plus the superlative, you're saying as something as possible, right? So that's what the quam is doing. So celerime means fast or quickly. So quam celerime, you want to translate as quickly as possible. So he carried himself, or he went as quickly as possible ad hortum hesperidum, to the garden of the Hesperides. Okay, so that first or main clause is a little jumbled up. In the middle, you have the relative clause with the qui, right? It's talking about the garden. Okay, so that qui, the antecedent is hortum. So you're saying the garden of the Hesperides, which aberat paucamilia, right? So the aberat part is talking about was being away, right? So a certain distance away. The paucamilia means literally a few thousand paces, right? The passuum. So remember, the passuum is the steps, right? Which is miles, is what we're really getting at here. It's the Roman mile, measure of distance, is basically how far a soldier can march. So that's why you have the paces there. So you can just translate it as miles. It's probably the easiest way to do it. And since it's accusative, you're showing sort of the distance or the extent of it is kind of one way to think about it. So when you put it all together, you're saying Atlas, was gone, was departing, and he had gone as quickly as, or carried himself, literally gone as quickly as possible to the Garden of the Hesperides, which was a few thousand miles away, right? Milia, a few thousand paces, a few miles away, whatever it is, depending on how you want to translate it. Okay, not 1,000 miles, by the way, just miles is kind of what you're getting at. Okay, so it's not too far away, but he goes off to find it. Okay, then you go on to the next part, and you have eo cum venisset, causam veniendi exposuit et filias suas vehementer hortatus est, ut poma traderant. Okay, or traderant rather. So you have eo, which means sort of there, right, in that place. So the cum here is really just saying when. Okay, so you're doing when. He had come there, right? When is said, you have the pluperfect subjunctive. So when he had gone there or come there, right? Meaning to the garden. He explained, exposuit, right? So he explained the causam veniendi. So literally, this means the like the reason of his coming, right? Why he's there. It's the gerund, right? So you can try to translate. It's genitive gerund, so you can translate it as ing. Is kind of the easiest way to do it. So the reason for his arrival is kind of one way to do it. The reason why he came. Okay, the causam veniendi. Okay, so he explained that to them. So he says why he's here, and he hortatus est, right? So he urged, right? So you have that deponent there, the hortatus est. So it looks perfect passive to translate it actively, right? So he urged on his daughters, filias suas, right? The Hesperides, right? His daughters. Vehemente means like, vehemente rather means like strongly. Okay, so he urged on his daughters, he kind of commanded them that they might traderen, hand over the poma, the apples, right? You have this indirect command happening, which is why you have the subjunctive, the ut clause. So he's urging them on, or he urged them on that they might hand over the apples, which is what he's trying to get for Hercules. Okay, so he goes there and asks him for the apples. Then you have the next line. You have Eli, diu hairebant, nolebant enim hoc facere, quod ab ipsa unone ita ut ante dictum est, hoc munus accepissent. So you're the Eli is talking about them, right? The Hesperides. Okay, so they is kind of what you're doing there. So they hairebant, they hesitated, right? Or they were hesitating diu for a long time, so they don't do this right away. Okay, and it tells you why. Nolebant there means they didn't want, right? So they didn't want to do facere hoc, this, right? The enim just means for, right? It's telling you why. For they didn't want to do this. So he says, give the apples, and they're like, I don't know, right? They have that pause. And the reason why is because, quote, accepissent, they had accepted hoc munus, this gift, ab ipsa unone, from Juno herself. Right, so they don't want to give it up because they got it from Juno, and it's just a precious thing, right? And then you have in parentheses the ita udante dictum est, which means thus as it was said before, right? Dictum est, it was said ante before. So it's almost saying like, yeah, like we said, or as it's been said before, this was a gift from Juno, so they don't want to give it up. Okay, so they're not really so gung-ho about giving up these apples. Okay, then you have atlas tamen aliquando eis persuasit ut sibi parerent et poma ad Herculem retulit. So Atlas finally, right, or however finally, so he persuasit eis, he persuaded them. Okay, so we already have that sort of indirect happening here, right? This indirect statement, because it's this, this persuasion part. Okay, so he persuaded them. I remember the verb persuade takes a dative, which is why you're looking at eis there. Okay, so finally he persuaded them that they might obey him, right? Sibi parerent, right? So he persuades them to obey him and give it over, right? Give over the apples. And he retulit, he brought back the poma, the apples, ad Herculem, right? So after this debate, they don't necessarily want to, want to help, want to give anything back. He persuades them, they obey him, right? Dad type thing. And he finally has the apples, and it's all good to go. He goes back to Hercules, okay? Then you have Hercules interior, cum plures dies expectavisset, neque ulam famam de reditu Atlantis accepisset, hac mora graviter commotus est. Okay, so Hercules has been waiting. So you have the meanwhile, right? Interior. Meanwhile, Hercules, when he had waited, expectavisset, you have the pluperfect subjunctive there, when he had waited for many days, plures dies, right? So this whole time, he's been sitting there. And remember, plures dies is accusative because you're showing the duration. So for this whole time, he's not sure where Atlas is. He's holding up the sky. Remember, he's getting a little antsy here. So he's been waiting this whole time. And he, accepisset, he had received neque ulam famam. So the neque is the negation. So you could say, and he didn't receive, or he had not received, accepisset, ulam famam, any rumor or report, de reditu Atlantis, of the return of Atlas. Okay, so he hasn't heard anything. He doesn't know where Atlas is. He's getting a little antsy, right? Which is how we end it. You have hac mora graviter commotus est. So he was greatly upset. The commotus can sometimes mean like moved, like emotionally moved or disturbed. Upset is a fine way to do it. So he was greatly upset, graviter, by this delay, hac mora, right? So the delay and having to wait for Atlas is not something that Herc is really pleased about. So he's mad, right? He's getting a little mad, waiting and waiting. Okay? Then we end with this. You have tandem, quinto die Atlantem videt redeuntem, et mox magno cum gaudio poma accepit. Tum, postquam gratias pro tanto beneficio egit, ad Graeciam proficisci maturavit. So finally, right, at last, or finally, on the fifth day, so we get a sense of how long this took Atlas rather to do. It took him 5 days to get there and back, right? So on the fifth day, he sees, meaning Hercules saw, rather, we did, right? He saw Atlantem redeuntem. So you have the present participle happening here. So you can say Atlas returning, right? He saw, you could say returning Atlas, although it doesn't really sound right. Atlas returning, right? He sees him coming back. And soon, right, Mox, acepit poma, he received the apples, magno cum gaudio, with great joy. So he's all excited because he got the apples to finish his labor, right? Then you have tum, then, right? We kind of shift gears. Then, postquam, after, he agit gratias, he gave thanks, pro tanto beneficio, for such kindness, right? We've seen that phrase before, actually a decent amount in Ritchie's, right? He likes to use that phrase of not only giving thanks, right? You have ago, gratias ago, right? Just perfect tense, but also that pro tanto beneficio, for such kindness, right? So he's happy and he's really glad that Atlas did it for him. So after he did this, he thanked Atlas, right, for being so nice. He maturaret proficisci ad Graeciam. He hastened maturaret to depart to Greece, right, to depart back to Greece. The proficisci is the present deponent infinitive, right? So to set sail or depart back to Greece, right? So he's all ready to go and he's ready to head back. Okay, so that's the chapter. It's not the longest one we've done. Pretty straightforward. But again, we're using a lot more subjunctive in here, different kind of grammar constructions. But there's nothing that you haven't seen in this. It's just a matter of practice, getting the vocab down and working your way through. So at this point, we're very deep into the Hercules story. Hopefully, it's feeling a lot more comfortable to read this. And that's the great thing about Ritchie is he tends to repeat phrases, repeat forms, different sentence structures, things that kind of make it a little more repetitive and easy to read. Even though you are kind of looking at a story, it's different every time. The grammar is actually manageable. Okay, but if you have any questions at all on it, grammar, translation, anything, feel free to put it in the comments below. I'm more than happy to help you out. But otherwise, keep practicing, keep reading through, right? Hopefully this video kind of set you on the right track and you feel good about it. But the more you read and practice it, the easier it's going to get for you. Okay, so keep at it and good luck.